which is all quantum field theory and all quantum minds, which affects not only microtubules collapse. I mean, anytime you can change a quantum state, you can cause it to collapse. This quote observer effect, right? You don't need a human observer, but if you do a measurement, you're collapsing it, right? And we do that all the time. Let's say we're trying to make a decision about something. And what that is it's a quantum superposition of all the probabilities of all the possible things that you're doing in making this decision. And you're balancing them all at once at one time. And then it's sitting here like this big superposition of states, which are the probabilities of all your decisions. And you're putting a little attention, without collapsing the wave function, you're paying attention to which part of that wave function you're looking at in your mind. And then all of a sudden you make a decision and the whole thing collapses, and now all of those probabilities are gone. You can look at it historically and say, well, I thought about all those probabilities, but you actually made a decision. You collapse those probabilities into a single future, if you want to think about it. So what we actually do is do that with our decision making.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really great example.
And healers can see those quantum probabilities in your mind. I know a lady who can do that. I talk about it in the book.
Does she
can see
elaborate?
All of that probabilities in the mind, and she can go say, you know, she doesn't tell them sometimes, these people, this, but she says, all you have to do is change. It's like, just pull this little stick out here and the whole thing will collapse. Because they're kind of like creating all this complexity and they're not letting it collapse, you know?
Yes.
So,
yes, I can feel into what you're saying. Does she elaborate how she sees the superposition of states?
Well, one of the picture in the book that shows that actually shows the aura, the color aura picture. It's not color in the book, it's black and white, but that picture is her picture. So she sees these thoughts as probabilities, waves, probability clouds.
Hold on, I have to see if I just heard you right. So there was some pictures of people, dogs, and what have you. Is she saying that when she sees the aura, she's actually seeing it as a probability cloud?
She's saying that when was doing therapy with clients.
Yeah.
And she it wasn't the one with the auras with the dogs. That was my sister.
Oh, okay.
But another picture that showed the aura, when I'm talking about the chakras and the aura, there's a picture that shows this big cloud of a normal auric like picture, you know. And she had it drawn, colored, and she gave me permission to use it in the book. Of course, it's black and white, but
yeah.
Interesting. She sees auras that way, the typical way you'd expect it to, right? But she sees that as information clouds, as probability clouds, where people are balancing all of these information fields and trying to make decisions about things. So
now, what you just said is this beautiful setup for our lay people brains to really now grasp why, when a psychic tries to predict, quote, quote, the future, I've had other researchers say it's not so much that they're usually wrong, the good ones. It's the time might be off because we're still such a part of the entire math, if you will, that any of us in our decisions and what we do every moment is still computing into it's this
set of probabilities cloud that are in superposition. They haven't collapsed yet.
Exactly.
You can think of that as a quantum cloud or a quantum mind cloud or whatever.
Beautiful. Yeah. So no wonder that someone might truly be a talented psychic, might truly get a precognitive sense of something that's about ready to happen. And no wonder that it can affect a little bit of the timing or the space of it just because of all it's still active.
Yeah.
It's active.
Yeah, and it hasn't necessarily collapsed yet.
Yeah, and that's
it's outside of time.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. And no wonder that you know, there's a lot of people who are scared right now because there's so many, you know, gloom and doom catastrophic scenarios being thrown out there. And especially I'm hearing of a lot of young people who are quite freaked out. So I hope that some of this information gets to them and they can understand that we are not powerless. And this is exactly why, as you and I talk about the individual mind that is quantum, apart from the brain, we are a collective mind. We are all working as a superposition of states. And each of our individual decisions are collapsing certain parts.
Yeah, some parts of the domain. Yeah,
but like you said,
it's not a field.
But it's not a field,
and it's not in space-time. It's an informational cloud, like informational cloud, and we can think of it as a probability cloud, which is more like quantum computing states as probabilities than anything else.
But I love those both phrases, you know, calling it an information cloud and calling it a probability cloud, I think is a great way to word it for us to grasp. But it shows the power that we have, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It says
we're not powerless.
That future is not set in stone. And each action that we take independently, definitely our part is important to the whole.
Free will.
We have free will, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything more you want to say about free will?
Well, just remember, probability and information are related.
Yeah.
If you were to look at all these probabilities and then you were to measure it 100 times, you would find out that these probability states are more likely than not, and that's the information stored in the probabilities. So that's what quantum computing does. The actual quantum states are, quote, probability amplitudes. They're just a mathematical way of representing that something that if you square it, you get the probability. So quantum computing is all about probabilities, and they call this wave function, this algorithmic mathematical algorithm that they use for talking about quantum computing, as a set of these probability amplitudes. And those probability amplitudes are just all anchors on a radius of one in the quantum state world. So.
And I think I also hear that where the wave amplitude is highest has the greatest likelihood. That is indicative.
Its square is a probability of one.
The greatest probability.
Its square is a probability. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's great stuff. On page 7, I'm going to skip a little bit because you actually kind of described already the bit of information as one-dimensional. You described how the qubits are quantum bits, and those are two-dimensional. And then you described already how they become 40 entangled bits called ebits. And you've definitely talked about how now it's created this aspect of reality that's informational. We've talked about how it's even more fundamental than the quantum. And on page 7 of your book, there's this great metaphor. So I'm actually going to quote from your book.
Go ahead.
It says, if our daily reality is a quilt made of square patches of the familiar 4 dimensions, length, width, height, time, then quantum dimensions are the threads that make up those patches. These quantum dimensions also make up unexplained parts of our quilt, like empty space, black holes, even the quantum mind. You kind of referred to the black holes. And in that following page, you said that proto-dimensional bits, these proto-dimensional bits, form the basis of empty space even, and the black holes in the infrastructure of the quantum mind. So I think this is really starting to paint a clearer picture. And then on page 31, very succinctly, you said, quantum states are the universal fundamental mechanism. It's built on bit dimensions, and this is the mathematical foundation of all physics.
And that's true for the geometric algebra that I use, but it's also true for the Hilbert space math. Those are orthogonal dimensions too. It's that's just one is a slightly different mathematical convention. And by the way, you get certain predictions that are different, which is interesting. In Hilbert space, you can say the Bell operator. Remember I said quantum computing is about reversing. Like if you have a phase angle, you rotate the phase in the superposition. So here's the phase and you rotate the phase. If you do the inverse phase of that, you can reverse the computation. You don't even have to know what it is. You can have 20 degrees to the left and then 20 degrees to the right, and you're back to where you started, even though you don't know where you were.
That actually that actually seems parallel to me to the way often time and entropy are talked about, because at the level of most, even though we don't experience time going backwards, we don't, if we drop an egg, we don't really see that we can reverse that. And at the same time, I think I keep hearing how in the physics and the math, time is always reversible. Is that?
Actually, that's not the case. It's just
okay.
in the notion, if you use the idea of reversible computer, reversible operations, any operation that you can reverse is reversible. And the ones that you can't reverse are measurements.
That's fascinating, because that just relates back to the wave function again.
Yeah, exactly. But what's interesting is the Bell operator in Hilbert space appears to be reversible, which means it says you could put something in the Bell state, and then you could undo the Bell state from an operator perspective, from the math perspective, from the algorithm perspective, right? Well, in geometric algebra, that's not true, because in order for the operator to be reversible, you have to have the inverse operator. And I showed in my geometric algebra in my dissertation 2 ways: exhaustive proof and closed form solution of the proof, that the Bell operator in geometric algebra is irreversible. It actually erases information. So it says entangled states are much more pervasive and stable than you would expect them to be in regular physics with Hilbert space math, which is really good, because guess what? Space itself is entangled.
Yes.
Dark energy and dark matter are also entangled. They're 4-dimensional. And they're stable no matter what we do. I mean, you have to interact with them, and they're hard to interact with. So that's the basis for all of the simulation in the universe.
Okay, so let me pause on that, because that seems huge. Because I think step. I just heard you said, that you talked about like how even space is entangled. Mm-hmm. And all of us are made of 99.9999% space.
Right. Even empty space has quantum foam in it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Right. And so light travels through that empty space using, it's using the electromagnetics, it's the electric field and the magnetic field that propagates through it, but it does so because there's a quantum foam for it to interact with it. So it's like an ether model, but it's a Lorentz invariant ether. So, this whole notion of that space is something, well, space is something at a quantum mechanical level, but it's only when you look way close with really small at the Planck scale that you see that something. Otherwise, you see it as nothing.
Yeah, we see it as nothing, but I think some estimates are like in 1/5 teaspoon of supposedly nothing vacuum of space, there's more energy than 10 trillion universes.
Yeah. It's just all balanced, just like the pressure at the bottom of the ocean versus the pressure at the top. There's a lot more pressure, but it's all balanced, so you can't use it.
But it is, like you said, on one hand earlier, it made it sound like entangling something is difficult. But if we already know that space itself is tangled, then it's like, oh, and when we even look at, I mean, I know that the research they've done, even when you think of what we're comprised of, I mean, not only have photons been entangled, electrons entangled, but even gluons and quarks have been entangled. So it does seem like entanglement is
entangled. 60 carbon atoms have been entangled.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like entanglement is the more pervasive real universe.
Yeah, and I wrote a paper and presented it at the UT in Dallas when I was there in 2010. And it's on the web. The talk is out there and the video is out there. It says it's the ubiquitous nature of quantum entanglement. So that was the earliest work I did on that work.
So if they Google for it, the ubiquitous.
Well, you go to quantumdoug.com and look for about 2014 for a web version of that. There's a link there. It's all my papers done in sequential order from newest to oldest, and so you just go down to about 2010. So.
Which I have definitely gone through that list. I definitely recommend for the viewers to go play around in your website.
Yeah, quantumdoug.com.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I have a question then. Because again, it's a vocabulary and you're being very patient with me. as this new vocabulary of bits is sinking in.
Well-defined language, yeah.
So when we're thinking of proto-dimensional bits, and then we're thinking, right, so proto-dimensional bits, that's dimensional, and then we're thinking of quantum dimensions. I mean, on one hand, let's face it, it seems all entangled and mixed in a way we have no idea. But how could we distinguish between that? Like if proto-dimensional is more fundamental than quantum, kind of, then how would, at a dimension level, how do we distinguish that language-wise?
Yeah. If you think that the bits are the raw material for the algorithm and everything is an algorithm, then even quantum computing is an algorithm running on those bits. So it's the foundational infrastructure for the quantum computer that runs the universe. And I'm going to give a talk about that in August.
Oh, you are? Do you want to tell people about that talk?
Well, it might be that they see it afterwards. It's for the Alternate Natural Philosophy Association conference in August. And I usually give talks there. And so then when the video is done, they'll have it online and I'll put it on my website. So.
Oh, very cool. So then when we're talking about dimension, we could say that it's the bit dimensions that structure the quantum dimensions. And it almost sounds like there's the exact same parallel with the word information. It's the proto bit information level is the foundation and it structures the quantum information.
Right.
Okay, so that actually, I had that right in my head. Cool. Well, then how are qubits, ebits, and thought related?
Okay. Well, we missed one thing on that other slide that I showed you.
Oh,
we went from 1 to 2 to 4 dimensions. Well, what is 3 dimensions?
Good question.
What is 3 dimensions? Do you want me to show the slide again or just
sure?
I can just talk about it. I mean, the idea is if you have one or two dimension, X and Y, and then you have this new dimension called Z, it's 3 dimensions. That's what we think about as 3-dimensional space.
Yes.
Okay. If you have, this is called in the algorithm mathematics side of quantum computing, this is called a qutrit instead of a qubit because it's a qutrit.
Yes.
Guess what? This qutrit, they think, is the structure of a photon.
Really?
Without the energy.
So is that called a virtual photon?
I would call this a virtual photon. And I believe, remember, Trinity is part of the Trinity.
Yes.
There's duality, and then there's Trinity, right? It's part of all spiritual traditions.
Yes.
So if you have a 3-way thing, 3 dimensions that form like this, then that's the Trinity of the light being, of the light orb.
That gives me chills.
Yes, it is. And that's what I'm saying is we know that this exists mathematically outside of space and time. It's just 3 dimensions. And guess what? If you take that formula, which is just A plus B plus C, it's that simple. That's the geometric algebra formula. If you square that, you get 0. What does that mean? It's a boson. It's light.
Wow.
Yes.
And that is triplet of triplet, triplet of triplet, triplet of triplet.
That's the whole idea is you're multiplying triplets times triplets. So.
Whoa.
And there's a whole kind of mathematics called quaternions. And quaternions are just saying, oh, we have I, J, and K, and they have these properties, but they really represent the properties of 3-dimensional space. Okay. Well, if you take A plus B plus C and you multiply it times this thing called ABC, which is a trivector, now you get AB plus BC plus AD, AC, right? That is the quaternion. So now if you have light, you also have space.
So are you saying then that light comes before space?
Light and dimensions, 3-dimensional, especially 3 dimensions in particular, space, are duals of each other.
Wait, go explain that one a little bit more.
So in other words, if you had a virtual world
that
had combinations of things that combined in sets of 3, you would have virtual light and virtual dimensions. So you would have what feels like extent in 3D.
Now, I have to say, most of us who aren't deep into the computers, and
or math,
that's like so many experiencers that I talked to, not only are they not, you know, as much with the math, but even computer language. So, right, we know in computer worlds nowadays, we're having virtual realities and artificial realities. And, you know, we understand that.
Yeah.
But how would you help us understand? I know technically you said a virtual photon is one, has the same topology, same structure, but without energy.
Yes.
But how can we can conceive of a photon, but how do we conceive of a virtual photon?
It's a structure that interacts with our mind in a way that we perceive it as light.
So we could
without the eyes.
Still see it as real.
Well, we see it in our mind's eye, and that's what I think auras are made
of, the virtual photons.
Yeah.
Intermingled with, would we
because
say
they don't have enough structure to have the energy associated, but they do have the structure of a qutrit.
So since informational is more basic than the energy,
the structure of the photon,
then am I mind melding you to understand that you are basically right now hinting to us how a photon itself could be structured from a virtual photon. So there's like a state of a photon that's actually a real entity, if you will. It just isn't of space-time. It doesn't have energy yet, but there is a way in bit informational mathematics to have it structure a real photon with energy.
Yes, exactly. And so can you imagine taking a bunch of bits
Love that.
And not only forming qubits and ebits and bits, right? But then you add more dimensions so that now you have space and time emerging out of that.
Yes.
You know, Planck time and Planck length, right?
Yes.
That somehow you can get space and time out of that. That is a higher dimensional version of what we've been doing in 1, 2, and 3, and 4 dimensions. And that now time and space itself is part of that dimensional soup. And the structure of that qutrit is now in a higher dimensional space that has the same qutrit type structure, but it has these additional dimensions associated with space and time.
Okay, that is fantastic. And if I'm remembering from your book correctly, I think it's starting to sink in. What you just said in parallel with virtual photons and the way they can be structured towards energy and therefore towards real photons,
space-time,
real light and space-time. Time itself, I think you said, the way it's kind of like it seems like a parallel with vibration. Like, you know, there's vibration, but without energy and frequency first. And then I'm hearing time is there's a way in the bit physics for change. Like, here's change. But now change on steroids can be constructed to be actual clock time, rhythmic clock time.
And so the way you do change in quantum computing, because most quantum computing is just rotations that are reversible. So is time passing or not? No, that's just taking a different observer of the same state. There's no computation being done. You're just looking at that same state from a different angle. But eventually you collapse the wave function, you do a measurement on it. So time occurs when you collapse, which is a measurement operator, and all those measurement operators are irreversible. So time comes out of the irreversibility of quantum states, of quantum operators.
Okay, so now
That's change. And that's completely independent of any kind of relativistic space-time. That's just, here's a state, and then there's a change occurred to it, and then here's another state, and there is a disconnect between, you can't see, they're not both there simultaneously, because one replaced the other.
Okay, you anticipated my question, because my brain is now trying to link what I'm learning from you to relativity, because we know there's a relationship between time and gravity, and we know time is relativistic. And so what I'm hearing from you is we can think of change as a different observer view but it's not quite time. So my mind
It's
is
not in
missing
time.
the
It's not
piece.
in time. Yeah.
Yeah. So my mind is missing the piece as
Okay.
to conceptually, how do we construct into
Okay.
like, because it almost seems like when you, even if you change that, I know this is, we're kind of thinking like time absolute clock here, and I know that's incorrect.
Yeah.
But it does seem like if you have a change that takes time. Yeah,
No,
clarify.
but in the abstract, there's no time yet. We're just talking
Right.
about a hyperdimensional space with no time yet.
Yeah, at the same
That's
way
at the
that
algorithmic
vibration
math level.
precedes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there is no time yet. We haven't, if you look at my PhD dissertation and the stuff I've done since then, it all doesn't assume space and time exist yet, even. It's just doing the mathematical algorithmic archetype of quantum computing and stuff like that. So what I just told you, though, about the photon only shows up in 3 dimensions. You don't have a qutrit unless you have 3 dimensions. Okay? Just like you don't have a knot only exists in 3 dimensions. You could take a string, a rope, and tie it in a knot, and then it'll stay, right? It only happens in 3. You can't create a knot in 2 dimensions, and you can't create a knot in 4 dimensions because it has another dimension to pull out. So knots only exist in 3 dimensions. Photons only exist in 3 dimensions too, the minimum structure that you need to.
Except for virtual.
It's a virtual photon. That's what I'm saying. It's 3 dimension. It's 3 dimensions, not our normal 3 dimensions. It's the same private dimensions that are bits and ebits and qubits.
Yeah, that's what we have to clarify, right? We're not talking about length, width, height. We're talking about these qutrits.
Qutrits, yeah. Turns out in a qutrit, you only have if you only have 2 dimensions, you only have 81 states that you can do. And you can look at all of those, and most of those are quantum computing states. Okay. But if you go to 3 dimensions, you have 81 squared. You have 6,400 and whatever states, all the permutations of 3 dimensions in all the addition and multiplication versions of that. And I talk about it in the paper. Well, there's enough complexity in 3 dimensions, of 3-bit dimensions, to have photons, to have electrons, to have neutrons, to have quarks, and to have other bosons as well. And so I talk about that in my book, and I say, don't look at the standard model as this 4x4 grid of the particles, leptons and bosons, and leptons and quarks and bosons. It's the wrong way to think about it. You have to say there's a certain number of particles that exist in 1 dimension. The only thing that is at a bit. In 2 dimensions, it turns out the neutrino is 2-dimensional. It's actually a particle whose formula is squared, it equals 1, and there's only 1 of those in 2 dimensions. So the neutrino, we believe, is 2-dimensional. And in 3 dimensions, there's the electron, the neutron, the proton. They're all what are called unitary. Their square is 1, and those are all particles, and everything that has a square of 0 are bosons. So you can find the bosons and the leptons, and the quarks are separate from that. And you can find all those particles.
Can account for all the standard model particles
through 3 dimensions.
At the same time, yeah, I think I need to fill in the blank here. At the same time, you had protophysics, right? So it was qutrits that were virtual photons without the energy, and then they could lead to the photons with energy
in space and time.
But photons don't have mass, right?
No, they don't. But it has the E equals h nu.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to have a wavelength. Well, you have to have space in order to have a wavelength. Okay.
Yeah.
But the important thing about a photon and all bosons is that for the photon, from the time it is emitted to the time it is absorbed, and it may be 13 billion years that have happened since then, because it may have been a primitive photon at the big bang, right? And so when that, or background radiation, right?
Yeah, the whole basis of our astronomy.
A photon that's been around for 13 billion years. Okay?
Right.
From the perspective of the photon, that is entire life, from our perspective, is 13 billion years. From the perspective of the photon, it's a single point in space and a single point in time. Photons have complete length contraction and time dilation because they're at the speed of light.
Yeah. So yeah, relativity right there.
So the photon you said is sending a signal. Well, in computer science, they call it signal and weight and signal. And that's the basis for any operating system. So light becomes the exchange for the operating system for the universe. So the universe not only has its own built-in bit infrastructure, this bit physics infrastructure, it has its own operating system built in. So everything can run in parallel without having any centralized operating system. It's a distributed operating system.
Yeah, which totally makes sense to me. Now, my mind now wants to fit in the phrase quantum vacuum to virtual. Here we got the virtual photon, and we have photon itself within space-time. So where does quantum vacuum or zero-point field fit in?
Yeah, I mean, they know that if you just look at space, there's nothing there, right? But if you look smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller down to Planck's length, and essentially what you're doing is using a microscope, and you have, in order to measure that, you have to use some kind of measurement tool like a photon. And you're using higher and higher frequencies of light, cosmic rays or higher, you know. And so you're going to smaller and smaller and smaller distances. And when you start looking at it at that level, the energy of the particle that you're using to do the measurement with is so high that the space-time itself looks boiling at that level. It's like a magnifying glass. If you just look at a sheet of paper, it's pretty smooth. But if you use a big enough magnifying glass, it's real rough. It has all these, you know, it's not rough. Or a beach. It looks smooth, but if you look at it, it has all these additional dimensions to it, you know, this ins and outs. Yeah. Now, so quantum foam is like that.
I was going to say, is quantum foam and quantum vacuum used interchangeably?
A lot of times they are. Yeah.
Is that a correct?
But the other thing about quantum foam is not only is how much you can amplify, you know, how much you're focusing in on it by what kind of measurement of wavelength you're using. But you can also, if you're traveling through space and you're at a high speed and you're approaching the speed of light, now you're interacting with that quantum foam in a way that now you see virtual particles that somebody who's going slower won't see.
Exactly.
So there's a relationship between your velocity. It's not just acceleration, it's velocity. And so if you're near the speed of light, now you're going to see a lot more actual particles because you're hitting them and they're not collapsing back from virtual particles back into the quantum foam. So it's this quantum foam, it's probability generating these probabilistic pairs, and then they collapse back on each other. So black hole radiation, Hawking radiation, is basically where the quantum foam outside the black hole is such that these spontaneous pairs are ripped apart. Instead of collapsing back on themselves, they're ripped apart because of the gravitational difference between those. They go a little bit apart, and then they're ripped apart because gravitation is different between the two. And so one of them falls into the black hole, and the other one is spit out, and that's Hawking radiation.
And it's interesting that they used to think that black holes were only like, you know, going to swallow us all up. And then they discovered that black holes actually birth entire universes. And I love seeing
there's a whole theory about that, about black holes. And, you know, it all has to do with what's the model, your best model for what the Big Bang was, you know, and nobody has a real definitive answer. We know up through, you know, microwave background radiation that we know up to about that time, but we don't know what happened before that. And if there was no time, how can you even talk about before? It's like going to the North Pole and you say, I want to go north farther. There's no place to go north if you're at the North Pole, because you're already as far north as you can go. So same is true with time. So now it turns out that if you have this proto time, you have something that can change even though time doesn't exist yet. And so that's part of the model too, is that.
So, yeah, that's how we were defining it.
So if you talk about source, people have this expression where they visit the source and they said, it's loving and it's the brightest thing they've ever seen, but it doesn't hurt their eyes because they're doing it virtually, right?
Yes.
So source is the source of all of this virtual light. And if you have all of that virtual light, then that much complexity feels loving because it's all entangled, and hate comes from polarity. And so if you're all entangled in your big superposition, then you're not in polarity. And that's where the bad stuff comes from, the polarity, because you're saying you're making right and wrong, left and right, good and bad, right? And those kinds of Democrat and Republican. I mean, you name it, right? You can label your polarity labels.
Oh, that's a big thing in psychology, is talking about polarized thinking is, one of the biggest things we humans do that get us into trouble.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you're going to talk about meaning at some point here, but you can ask the questions now.
Well, and I know we're going off on a few tangents because you're just doing such an amazing job of bringing in a lot of these complexities of, let's face it, what do experiencers want to know? We want to know, how are these other realities and dimensions and multiverses, how are those real? How are those as real as are real? Because that's how they are experienced.
And how can thought affect it?
And that certainly comes from it. So I definitely have some questions along those lines. But so if I back up and so when we ask the question qubits, ebits, and thought related, I'm not quite sure I can still answer the question. How would you simplify that?
Okay, so remember I said that if you take 3 qubits and you form 8 states, and we label them as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Is binary. Okay. They call that the Ket notation, but you don't have to do it in Ket notation. In geometric algebra, we have the same thing. You just have this thing that constitutes 2 or 3 dimensions combined together at one time. And that is a higher level dimensional object than a vector. And it's a 2-dimensional object. So if you have 2 bits forming a qubit, anytime you create a coupled space that has 2 bits in it, you create this new thing, which is the plane defined by those 2 bits, and the plane has a spin to it, and the orientation is x, like x to y. Then the spin direction is orthogonal. It's in or out of that dimension. So it's a complex object we call a bivector.
Okay.
And it looks the labeling the same as the way that math does it in Hilbert space. But in Hilbert space, they just call that the label for the dimension. They don't understand that dimension is actually a 2-dimensional object.
So is a thought related to a bivector?
Yes. In fact, you have bivectors, trivectors, quadvectors. And when you say, I have a thought that is a combination of all these states, it's those states that are simultaneously 3 aspects or 10 aspects or 100 aspects forming this little n vector. It's called an n vector because this can be 2, 3, 4, 100 dimensions, all forming this structure. And think of it as a sort of a bit molecule, if you want.
Yeah, so it sounds like if we're talking to those of us who are less savvy about this, in some way, maybe we could simply say it's just like thoughts are of differing complexity, thoughts are comprised of
simultaneousness.
In other words, varying numbers of vectors. They are vector molecules, like you said.
Yeah, like you said, in each one of those little vectors, you can think of as meaning.
Yeah.
Happy, sad, relaxed, not relaxed, right? There's happy, there's relaxed, there's sad, there's depressed, there's joyous, there's loving. Each one of those mentions. And if you combine those things into these little meaning molecules, and Robert Monroe called those rotes, he says rotes are just packets of meaning. So it's kind of a recursive definition. The rote itself contains meaning.
I actually love that, though, because if we talk about packets of meaning or bundles of meaning, for those of us who have had spiritual downloads where the information just comes in whole. And I think the whole substructure, if you will, of when we have ESP, telepathy, remote viewing, when we are taking our mind and pointing it to something in our mind, the intention is fueling it from the heart. It has a meaning.
It's attracting it.
It has a meaning here that we can't even put into words.
Right.
But the universe knows how to match up those meaning and intention packets.
And so you can have this packet of meaning, a rote. It's like an internet packet, but it has meaning to you. And so they see these in remote viewing experiments. They do the intention to connect with the thing, and all of a sudden, here comes this packet of information. And then it's like they have to unfold it carefully, otherwise they'll destroy it, because it's like a quantum measurement. And if they measure it from the wrong perspective, they'll destroy the information rather than get the information out of it.
Well, and to go a little further down that road that you just raised is right in remote viewing or anytime. This also relates to remote viewing, dreams, a lot of instances where we are given symbolic clues. And the symbolic clues, what I've really noticed it has in common is the symbolic clues relate to the person. It's about the meaning that relates to the person. So I remember John Edward, he is, one of those psychics that's been on TV. I remember, I think Gary Schwartz, who was doing research, who did not really believe in mediumship, and he started doing research, and he actually became a believer out of this research. And I think he actually said that John Edwards is one of those psychics that really experimentally was showing accurate. But I remember John Edwards saying one time, they, meaning these spirits on the other side, they may show me a red wagon because of the meaning the red wagon has. It's communicating through symbol a meaning, and it's evoking a meaning in me that now will get me to say this to you. But if it were showing it to another psychic who does not at all have the same meaning, they're not going to see a red wagon.
They have a different dictionary for their thoughts. Yeah. So.
Everybody has their own unique little encyclopedia and dictionary there. Yes, right, exactly. That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. So my point about saying all of this about these rote structure and this, regular Hilbert space math for quantum computing just labels these dimensions, but they don't understand that they're actually higher dimensional things. So now all you have to do is you have the super high dimensions, but you don't, and you have a point in there, but you have no structure to it. But in the geometric algebra, it's more obvious that what you're doing with is bivectors and trivectors and quad vectors and like this. And so now you have these structure for the molecules of this stuff. And that's that little bivector I just talked about is the spinner that you keep talking about. And my buddy and I who worked on this believe that's the basis for magnetism.
Okay. Back up.
Because it's just a plane. So therefore you can't have a three-dimensional version of it. You can only have
okay, back up 3 sentences, because I definitely want to get this. Because magnetism, as I think I've hinted to you, has some particular meaning to me. So
yes, I hear you.
The basis of magnetism
is these little structured things called bivectors.
So we have the bivector. So it's not,
which is a topological structure in 2 dimensions.
Okay. 2-dimensional.
And then we can think of that as the magnetic primitive in my geometric algebra.
Love that. Okay.
And it's the other important thing. It relates to your twistors that you were talking about. Twistors? No. What was the other one that you were talking about? The guy from MIT. Torsion, yeah.
Torsion.
Yeah. So what that is?
Talks about torsion.
So it turns out any bivector, if you square it, you get -1.
Okay.
Essentially, it's an operator that says, look, I'm going to spin you 90 degrees. And then if I spin you again, I'm going to get a -1. So if you take the square root of that, you get the square root of -1, which is the complex number. So complex numbers automatically emerge, even though you don't have complex numbers to start, because a bivector is a focused a complex number for 2 dimensions.
Interesting. So you're saying, am I hearing right, that bivectors would also be precursors towards torsion, the way
potentially, yes,
some people potentially are talking about torsion in their theories?
Yeah. And so regular quaternions are 3 bivectors, the sum of 3 bivectors. And so that makes essentially this plane, and this plane. That's the same as difference as having this vector, and this vector. It's just another representation. You're taking a planar view rather than a vector view. So that's quaternions. You can make a 3-dimensional space using quaternions. Well, it turns out if you take pairs of bivectors, you can form things that look just like quaternions, except they're a higher dimensional, 4-dimensional version of quaternion. We call them tauquernions. And they have all the properties of quaternion, but they're in 4 dimensions. So now you can simulate 3 dimensions inside 4 dimensions. You can also simulate, I mean, this is a good example of how you can embed concepts in a higher dimensional space and still have them be true. And you can also do a 5-dimensional space. You can build 3-dimensional simulation, and they're entangled inside 5-dimensional spaces to create a 3-dimensional space. So that says if the universe was really 4 or 5-dimensional spaces, these prototypical vectors that we're talking about, bit vectors, you could simulate 3-dimensional spaces inside them using entangled states. That's why I say space itself is entangled. And that was all in that paper from 2010.
Oh, that's fantastic. So maybe unfortunately for you, you just made my mind go to hologram. Because we've actually talked about how virtual hologram or virtual photon can be built in your model towards our regular space-time photons. And at the same time, when you were talking about this topology that you were just talking about, my mind went to, is that how within space-time, no wonder people are using holographic theory, and at the same time, would it be accurate enough to say that the holographic theory, which might work within space-time, other people say it's not a good model because it doesn't go beyond space-time.
Yeah.
But I almost feel like the way you're describing some of this protobit physics and dimensions, that through virtual photon to photon, maybe that's how it goes from proto dimensions into holographic theory. Is that possible?
Okay. Well, a lot of people use holographic theory just because they can physically hold a hologram in their hand and they can see a holographic image. So they have a metaphor for talking about that something that every point on the hologram is the sum of all the parts of the system, right? So they talk about
and even let me put in this phrase as you're talking about it, because I think the phrase that sticks with so many of us who hear about a holographic theory and go, oh, that's helpful, is because when you're having an experience, you experience all things at the same time.
Yes.
And so then you're like, what? But when you read about a hologram, the phrase I hear most often is, the defining trait is the information, right? Comes back to your theories. Your information for the whole is embedded within each part. So then that makes an experiencer go, oh, okay. So now if we translate that to your language, what do we say?
Okay, so if you have these molecules of meaning that I was talking about,
yes,
and they exist independently of each other. So it's this 2 to the 300th states. Okay, so what you're getting is you're looking at a complex superposition of states that are not individualized. They're all at once. It's the sum of all those experiences at one time. So it's actually a kind of concurrency. It's not possible.
You just made that completely sink in. So in some ways, I think what I'm hearing is we don't need to borrow holographic language at all,
No,
because superposition of states by itself.
Yes, because they're concurrent and they're holistic.
Totally makes sense.
They're holistic, which is the thing you really want from a hologramic idea, concept. But it doesn't have to be a hologram to do that. Yes, and in hyperdimensional space, it just says, see, if you took 2 to the 300th states and you represented each one in a molecule or an atom in space-time, it would be bigger than the universe, because that's so many of them.
Wait, say that one again.
In other words, you can't use matter to represent that many states and get concurrency. If you try to put complex states, really complex states, not high frequency states, a lot of superposition, a lot of complex states, and you try to put it in space-time, it doesn't fit. That's what Shor's algorithm is. Shor's algorithm showed that we can use quantum states to solve a problem that you can't do with classical computing.
That makes total sense. And I think that's why you mentioned that non-locality itself may simply be that we're seeing something in a higher dimension, whether it's 4D or what have you, but we're in 3 dimensions. So to us,
well, we're assuming everything's in 3 dimensions. That's our perspective. The same thing if you have a near-death experience.
Yeah.
What do? You step through the tunnel, and then you have a life review. Well, what is a life review? You just stepped out of time. You're seeing your whole life instantaneous, this panoramic time view.
Yep.
You're seeing it concurrently, but you're still put a label on it that it's sequential. But it's fast because it's all happening all at once.
Well, and technically, when they're trying to describe it to someone when they come back, then they're putting it sequential. But
they're trying to put it back into time. Yeah,
but there is such agreement that on the other side, you're experiencing all things
all at once.
You are,
and that's a kind of concurrency, not a kind of hologram.
Yes. And I'm going to clarify for the viewers that, for example, you're experiencing you as you, but you're experiencing everybody else also. You're experiencing all of your emotions and thoughts. You're experiencing all of your actions, but you're also experiencing how they felt, each of them.
Because all of that's encoded in this space.
It's like you're all things. Yes. There was an experiencer who once described a veteran and described the experience of the near-death experience involved a plane that almost completely blew up. But in that moment, when time went slow motion, he was himself, but he was the pilot, but he was the Pepsi can that was going up, and he was within every drop of the Pepsi that was spilling all over the place, and etc.
That's right. Because as soon as you step out of stop paying attention to your brain, you're actually stepping out of space and time. So now you're doing your quantum mind maximum concurrence intelligence. And you have the awareness of all those states simultaneously, because they're not, you can't, if you're sequentially going through all those states, you can't switch fast enough. But if you're doing them all simultaneously, then you can observe all of them simultaneously, and you're just remembering them later, all the ones that you observed.
And trying to put it in sequential language. This is the absolute best language description I have ever heard to help us really, truly scientifically understand what's going on. And you're saying it in such a way that really makes sense, I think.
It's an outside of time model. And the outside of time model, because it's a hyperdimensional space, and space and time are related. So you have maximum. These states in our normal space would be considered space-like, because if they were in space, they would be too far apart to be connected by the speed of light, by the light cone. But since they're outside of space, they're naturally space-like, and you can have all of them, as many as you want. You don't run out of room. You can be infinitely, what's called infinite intelligence from a law of attraction perspective. You can be infinite intelligence. You're tapping into your infinite intelligence.
Well, because like you said, it's all at once, and that's exactly what people experience. And you alluded to it earlier, the feeling of love, we really can equate that there is only one thing in all of this multiverse, and it is this love, which is this interconnectedness. And so, like you said, any polarity, really, it's just about love, and then how much information love did you dump? How
Yeah.
much,
And you can
like,
have so much love in this vector that all the other stuff is so small compared to that it's immaterial.
well, and we lose our love, right? So here we're in the state of maximal infinite love in a way that this linear mind
And
can't.
we mourn it when we no longer access it anymore.
Well, and look at how many researchers are confirming how the brain is acting as a filter. So, right, we have this broader consciousness that the brain, literally, we see not only is it an antenna, and I think you mentioned it works as a random event generator, it works as like a PK psychokinesis.
Yeah, it's a transceiver, does both.
Transceiver. And at the same time, the message that's coming across is, and it's filtering. It's truly, it within space time, it wants you to be able to focus on one thing at a time, not the all. And so the brain is filtering out your consciousness.
Yeah. So the biggest job the brain does, if your mind is a hyperdimensional space, think of it as an orb that's just literally a hyperdimensional grouping of these photonic qutrits. Okay. And that's a good way of thinking about consciousness, as your aura is just this orb that has so many of them, but all you see if it's a hyperdimensional sphere, but it only exists in 3 dimensions as a sphere, because the inside of it is a whole set of dimensions under there, like another world. Okay.
So let's distinguish. Hold on, because you're on a roll here, and this is going to be great. So as you're giving this description, let's differentiate between, okay, so we have, let's say, as soon as we go out of body, you're going to pick the language for us, but as soon as we're out of body, we're either an orb, or we're our aura, or we're something. And then, like you said, we know auras exist, we know orbs exist, and we know that orbs, by research, we know that orbs can be a couple things. It can be a deceased spirit who is appearing as an orb that you're going to describe for us. Yeah. It can also be
autistic kids show up as well.
A body. It can be us when we're astral traveling. And there's been amazing research, some of it anecdotal, that's true. But, when you have vertical, confirmed by multiple witnesses and what have you, like, I'm going to make up an example, but it's related to a specific case that, I read about in a journal. But it was about, let's say, this woman is asleep as far as she's concerned. And as far as she's concerned, she awakes from a dream. But her husband is on a ship, military, and he's on a ship. But at the same time that she was asleep and dreaming, and he was in some other time zone, but the roommate awoke and saw the woman appear as if she were a ghost. Appear in the room checking on her husband, and in her dream she was there checking on her husband. But that person saw her as a ghost. So give us.
And then there's another example where autistic kids are essentially traveling all the time as orbs. And so if you're a telepathic and you can talk to the orb, you can find out that they're actually an autistic child, and that they have a name, and you can go find out who they are. And
yes, they too are living. And I know in my book too, I talked about autistic kids in particular, and the psychic nature of these kids. But okay, so now give us a vocabulary. What vocabulary is optimal for describing our individual consciousness that is part of the collective consciousness?
Yeah. So just like chakras, as you go up the chakras, you want more complexity, right?
And it's more embedded, right? It's like,
so essentially complexity is equal to dimensions. So you have more dimensions.
Yes, the higher the complexity,
the bigger the dimension, the more dimensions you have, and they're all coupled, the more you will act like a whole. You know, entanglement using the idea of wholeness.
Yep.
Right? The more whole you are, now you don't have little bitty subpersonalities that are all isolated from each other. So the idea of building your complexity up so that is more you build it up. Right now, most of us don't breathe and we don't ground. And so essentially our astral, our flow through our chakras and stuff like that is just minimal. It's like we're holding our energetic breath. So if we can do these breathing exercise and grounding exercises, and sometime you and I are going to go record one of these breathing exercises or these.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. And we're going to have it available to your people. And the idea is if you can take all the chakras and treat them as though we're going to entangle them, we're going to couple them, and now we're going to build the superposition of all those states. It builds a complex system that's bigger than anything that we normally experience. And that is the state. That is the state that you want to get to when you're having a near-death experience. You're no longer bound by the restrictions on the physical, the entropy of the physical, the space-time limitations of the physical. Now you're in your whole self, and that complexity builds. And as you build love, you're building even more complex states, a wholeness, and more complexity and bigger states and more. And now all of a sudden, the polarity of all the individual emotional states just wash away. And so what is it? It's all love. It's conditional. It's unconditional love because it's
everything together.
It's just more and more energy, and it's so big and it's so connected with everything else that you can only experience as love. You label it as love from a meaning perspective because there's no other label for it.
Exactly. Now, though, you have cautioned me against using the word energy beyond space-time.
Yeah, right. So it's a complex state that you perceive as this bigger and bigger orb. And some people
feels like energy.
And you feel powerful because they say God is all knowing and all powerful. So which one is bigger? Which one is better for God to be? All powerful or all knowing? Because if you're all knowing, you're also all powerful. So knowing part of that, one's an energy model and one is an information model. So the knowing is part of meaning. So if God is all knowing, then he knows how to do quantum field theory for changing anything in reality. So he's all powerful too. So information technology is more powerful than energy technology at that level.
So in that language, could we say if we were thinking not from space-time and building it to beyond, boy, is my crown chakra buzzing right now. Whatever I was
well, that's
thinking.
Good to hear.
Woo!
We're opening up.
Whoa. So because I was about ready to go there, right? So if we're thinking in terms of God, and then basically God must like that because he is really buzzing me right now. Okay.
Yeah. He is the most complex thing that we can imagine, and most of us can't even imagine what that is.
Of course, right? Like you said, all these languages.
It's an infinite amount of complexity.
Exactly. All these languages are beyond our words, all these experiences.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're going from that all, and we're coming, right? It's like in the beginning was the word, and there was light.
Right.
And
word is equivalent to thought, and then light is equivalent to the qutrit in the virtual light source.
Can we also say word is equivalent to vibration?
Yeah, well, it is. It's the structure. It's the structure of thought, which is this. In order to,
so it becomes synonymous.
The only difference between thought and the word is a meaning structure, and if you say it, it's now in time. So you can add the time dimension there potentially.
It gave me chills.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Okay, so essentially, we could say that the word is the vibrational structure of thought.
Intention and meaning, yeah.
All of that, yes. And that essentially has a power that appears as energy within space-time.
All of this complexity and structure is order.
Yes.
It's not just randomness. Otherwise, it would just all wash out. It's an ordered. It's like
Incredible
messages in the water. You know, the crystal is formed. The crystal is a more powerful construct than just randomness.
Yes, Masaru Emoto's work. Beautiful.
Yes, exactly. Right. Messages in the water. And so the point is that this thought is more complex, more structured. And you think of it as these orbs are little hyperdimensional snowflakes because they're all crystalline.
Great analogy.
Okay. And so it's the opposite of what entropy does in the metric space. If you're outside of space-time, now you're getting more complex as a result of
the law seems to be
the opposite
complexity and order in space-time. Scientifically,
it's entropy,
appears to be disorder and entropy.
And chaos. Yes. So in speaking of that, and I don't know if you wanted to bring this up or not, but I'm going to bring it up because it's directly related. Yes. We have this technology here, our WISH technology. That
I was going to bring that up, but yes,
in a company.
Tell us about it now.
And so what it is that we have this, it's this little light, but what it is a device the size of a, controller for your TV, right? And you just turn
like
it
you
on.
said, like a remote control.
Yeah, exactly. And it has a little
turn
stand.
It on.
Yeah, you just turn it on and the little light goes on. And what this is doing is it's creating these little hyperdimensional meaning structures. And so these four dimensional objects. So your space now is conditioned in, this is the terminology from Tiller, you use conditioned spaces, but it's a coherent space. That's the name of the company, Coherent Spaces. And you turn it on and it conditions your space to be a higher dimension. It starts raising up the grade to your space. So now you're tapping into this higher level complexity instead of the 3D complexity that we have with entropy. So this is...
the viewers can feel what I just felt because I'm almost dizzy.
Yeah. And,
it's so powerful for me.
I've had it on this entire talk. So if you wondered why you've been building, I just showed it you for the first time now, but it's been on for the first almost 2 hours that we've been talking. So
beautiful.
And this is the heart, what's called the heart one. We have another one called the mind one. And so just realize you can apply this.
Device?
It's a oscillator. So, but it's using quantum resonance. It's not using electromagnetic resonance. Because it's using quantum resonance, it's non-local. So you and I are connected to this, not because of the electromagnetics. It's because we're connecting in a non-local way.
Exactly, which is why I can feel what you feel. When you raise your hands, I can feel when you raise your hands.
Yep.
I definitely can always link with people non-locally and can feel it. So that's actually a quantum resonance device. And can you just give us...
And really, there's not anybody out there who has a quantum resonance device like we do. And this is a 30-year-old technology that we're helping bring to the world again now. So
two questions. Maybe you can just, as a side note, just clarify how quantum resonance is different from the electromagnetic resonance that we did describe earlier. But also, is that an imprinted device?
This one, it has the only imprint. This doesn't need to be an imprintable device because it has the imprint. It's like a little genie. It's for the highest good of all involved. That's the intention.
Okay.
Beautiful. So you don't need, but you can interact with it like a genie. It says, I need help with this. So give me insights for how to do that.
Okay, so from a quantum resonance standpoint, if I were just making up what I think would be the answer, my quantum states are in some kind of coherence with that.
And this is helping connect it with other law of attraction kind of connections with other people like that.
So would that be an accurate statement that it's...
Yes, what you said. Wow. And so, we've built this company. I co-founded this company with a couple of other people. The mad scientist guy who's the technology he's our consultant, and then a chiropractor and a person who works with autistic people. And we've been in business 2.5 years now. And I manufactured these right in my house. And if you order them online, I ship them from here. So they're built with care and love. So
tell people a little bit about that work with autistic clients, because I can definitely say if I were in my other more licensed counselor practice and I were working more with the autistic, ones, I would definitely recommend that people set up experiments to go ahead and start getting a scientific database of the data on the effects with the autistics. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you know on their effects.
Yeah, Tiller did a study on that with an earlier version of this device that he called the intention host device. And he got non-local effects. And there's other companies right now that basically you can go sign up for a monthly fee that says, we will broadcast energy to you for this fee. If you sign up your name, and we'll put your name in front of the device so many minutes a month, and then we're broadcasting energy to you non-locally. And Tiller did the same kind of research back 10 years ago or 15 years ago already. So there's this idea. In fact, he did autistic children healing with intention host device doing that. And they showed a measurable effect on some autistic measurement scale. They did improve. Okay. And so the point is, this stuff is real. And this is the modern incantation, version 2.0. And it's much more robust than the early version that Tiller had manufactured. I mean, Tiller's organization didn't manufacture it. They were just using it in research, and somebody else is manufacturing it.
And just so our viewers are clear, we're talking about William A. Tiller, who used to be at Stanford and then went on and did that amazing work that we were talking about earlier.
And my co-author.
And definitely your co-author. We sorely miss him now that he's gone. But you're saying that this is a second version, a more robust version than the one he was using in his original experiments.
Yeah, and you don't have to program it with your attention. You just treat it more like your best friend and genie that you can confide with, and it helps you get insights about how you should proceed. And I do it all the time.
When people are reading your book and you're covering the part where you and William Tiller are talking about the intention host device, can they use that as a visual?
Well, they can. In fact, his device is white and ours is black, so it looks very similar. But just realize that this company started after my book was written. So it's beyond what Tiller did. But
essentially, it's a little device like that. It's
yes, exactly.
It's not a room full of computers.
No, if you go to coherentspaces.life, there's pictures of it there, and they're the size of a TV remote.
Yeah. So I'm looking over, because I'm glad we got to talk about your wish device. I was going to make sure we did that before we stopped for tonight.
Yeah, and it was appropriate because we're building complexity with this the same way that we just talked about. So if you've been wondering why your energy's been building, not only because of the great conversation that we're having and the rapport we're having, but this has been on the whole time too. So.
Well, yes to everything that you just said. So I'm looking at some of the things that we wanted to make sure we covered. We may have covered, I know, because we talked about the orbs and the auras, and I think you kind of talked about it as subtle light. So we'll just tell our viewers who hopefully are going to go out and get your book, that the aura and the subtle light is related to the conversation we were having earlier about the virtual photons.
Yeah.
And then
and I think that's what biophotons are really virtual photons.
Well,
because I don't think you can actually measure them per se. It's more auric site kind of thing. But maybe
supposedly they were measuring, so you and I maybe can go and
talk about maybe I have a different definition
of later.
Biophoton.
Yeah, because as I don't want to now name the researchers and then name the wrong one.
Yeah, but the difference between an aura and biophoton is probably the difference.
Yes. So in other words, now we understand that there are photons that they're calling biophotons, and they're measuring them. And at the same time, you and I are talking about that there's a layer of virtual photons that don't have energy, but they have the same kind of a topology, and they're a precursor for a photon. Yeah. And so we're talking about how the aura is probably all of that. And we talked about spirit and light.
And the ordering aspect of consciousness versus the chaos and entropy of the 3D physical worlds.
Yeah. So I think you've given us a really good idea of that. Is there any difference between aura and orb technically? And I'm guessing
I think orbs really are just auric. I mean, if you look at what I was just describing before, is you can build your aura to the point that it looks like a giant orb. It's just you know, that it's just, you can build it whatever size that you want, and you can make it as thick as you want, as complex as you want. And that's that meditation that we're going to do sometime.
Yes. And I have caught different kinds of orbs. Most of them are spherical. The one that mystifies me the most is the one my husband just took a picture of me outdoors. I was at a French cafe, and, you know, we were just taking pictures. We weren't thinking of any of this. And then later on, I was looking and I'm like, what is that on the tablecloth? There was, you know, nothing in the tablecloth when I was there. And I looked closer and it looked like, did not look like an orb. I mean, from a real distance in the photo, it did.
Yeah, was this the one in your talk that had a heart with a tornado, with a little tornado in it?
Yes, it right. It was kind of like a heart shape, and then an outer heart shape that somehow was interlinked in a little tornado
and a little lace structure too.
It looked like a little lace structure. I would love to hear what your mind was doing when you saw that.
This is the kind of snowflake kind of structures that you get when you have ordered.
Kind of like Masaru Emoto's structure of water. Structure.
Now, and imagine that being in 5-dimension crystals instead of only 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional crystals. So.
Oh, good point, right? Because the picture is 2-dimensional, but what if we really could have taken it and seen what it would
like a snowflake is really 3-dimensional. We think of it as flat, but it's 3-dimensional, right? It's mostly flat.
Absolutely.
But you could have structure that was a true 3-dimensional snowflake that created a snowflake that was a ball almost. But then imagine that, but each little crystal, as it's growing in 5 dimensions instead of 2 or 3 dimensions. So
I love that. Was there any significance to that little tornado thing in the middle, or to the shape at all to you?
Oh yeah, well that's what you said, the torsion field. I mean, remember I sent you the photo of the Anu? Even that is spinning. And that was a 9-dimensional structure. So it's more like string theory. So
yes, and I remember that being into I think Ani Besant, didn't she? Back when Ani Besant
occult chemistry
had the intuition of that before we knew about atoms. It was like she had intuited.
She thinks it's like equivalent to quark theory.
Say that again?
It's equivalent to quark theory. If you go read occult chemistry.
Fantastic.
She was describing the contents, the substructure of atoms before they knew about quarks. And they look.
You know what I loved about quarks when I first read about quarks was the fact that they came into 3 pair. And I thought, is there a significance there with the Trinity?
It's because it's a more stable structure from a field perspective.
Okay.
Because if there's just two of them, it doesn't. But if there's 3 of them, then they bond better. Because now they have bonds with 2 other things instead of only 1 other thing.
So when you think of the gluons that are binding the quarks together, and I think I read recently that they've now seen gluons that are called glue balls because they're basically just pure force.
Well, if you pull a quark and pull it away due to atomic accelerators, right, particles, the gluon stretches so much that all of a sudden that energy is turned into 2 virtual particles. And one of them collapses back into the photon, and the other one is a quark pair. It's a meson, which is 2 quarks, quark and antiquark. And so you have mesons, but you can also have 2, 3, 4, and 5 pentaquarks particles. So you can have all these structures with quarks, and they've measured all these before. So.
These are fantastic. All right, so we talked about orbs. Oh, I did want to ask you, so during energy work, what are we actually working with then? Are we working with energy, which is space-time? Are we working with aura or virtual photons or actual photons, or all of the above, perhaps?
The virtual photons is this complexity structure. You're tapping into the complexity structure, which is an ordering effect. So you're actually borrowing the order from the spiritual domain to help bring homeostasis back to the person whose aura is very limited. It's been constrained and held their breath essentially energetically.
Well, and I do know that I went through the quantum touch healing.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Training, because that resonated for me, and Qigong always resonated, and so it's all based on that.
Yeah.
And what I love about one of the teachings is they always remind people you're not using your energy, because you have a beginning energy therapist or energy work person, and they're feeling their energy, and it's as if they're trying to put their energy in the person.
You're actually directing the energy from the universe to them. It's not your own energy.
And that's going to be really important about this talk for them, because they have to realize that it's not about imposing your energy on these people. You're being the conduit for things you don't even realize, like virtual photons.
Yeah, and the complexity, the complexity, which is if people who have had near-death experience then recover because they've been in a coma and they recover from stage 4 cancer.
Yes.
And they're in a month, they're completely healed. We don't know how that's possible to do automatic healing like that, or placebo healing, right? We don't know how that works. But it apparently that the order that they get from tapping into this higher resource reserve of coherence, of order, of complexity that is our spiritual mind, our quantum mind, then all of a sudden that brings order back into the physical world. So,
and that really resonates for me, because even when I've done some of that, it's as if it does feel like if you get your state to resonate, a quantum resonance with these higher states, how am I trying to put that into words? It does feel like you are the state itself. Even for me, before you and I even met, it felt like information.
Yeah.
And meaning,
a knowing, a meaning
role. Well, it definitely felt like an information state.
Yeah.
It's just like any particle is a state of atomic structure, if you will. Yeah. It's a state of structure, a state of dimensionality. I could feel the information having its structure, and it would be that I would resonate with that state. And because I became in resonance with that state, that you can't have ill health in that complexity. You can't have ill health in that state. And so
it's a consistent state. It's a wholeness
imposed state. And you have to conform to that. Your inner structure has to conform to that. Yeah. So I would say that is the beginning of a basis for how these spiritual healings, psychic healings, energy healings work, is because of that quantum resonance information. So am I saying that correctly, do you think?
Yeah, exactly. And I would add that you talk about resonance, but it's more like you're tapping into similar meaning. So it's more like law of attraction. You're connecting to a similar state, and there's no frequency, there's no resonance to be had, but there is law of attraction.
Well, you did say we could use quantum resonance as a term, right?
It's a quantum resonance, but think of it as an address in a high-dimensional space. We're creating these meaning molecules that help structure the space to raise the complexity of the space. So now it's less like matter and more like light.
Yes, and it definitely resonates. There's that word again. It definitely
I know that you like that word, so I'm not saying that you can't use it, but realize that resonance is really an in-space-time kind of idea. Exactly. And we're talking about law of attraction idea and coupling and entanglement ideas more than that, because all of those are information concepts rather than energy concepts.
Yes. Although now you're going to make me go back to coupling. However, just to finish this one thought, it definitely, it feels very intuitive. It resonates. When you're saying that the meaning, I'll put it in my words now, that the meaning is what is giving structure to the information, which is why it resonates for me when you say meaning is even more primitive than information.
Meaning is the result of having this primitive information infrastructure. The net result of this is these complexity structure builds, and then you have meaning in there. And that's the basis for telepathy.
Wait, hold on. So are you saying that information comes first and then meaning?
The meaning is this complexity buildup from this lower level things that are the bit level physics of the meaning. So you start out with some distinction, right? Remember I said bits are just distinctions. And so each set of dimensions are their own little attribute of some meaning. And so then they form this molecule structure that has a complexity of meaning, a big structure. And you might have a million dimensions of that meaning molecule. So
that actually makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So down to the last couple questions here. In NDEs, notice that people will describe these colors that don't exist in our plane.
Yeah, I like this.
Landscapes, you know, and we're talking also about vivid dreams, by the way.
Yeah,
and so
lucid dreams.
Right, we're telling our viewers that we can't use the frequency language because that's space-time language. So we usually think of a color as a particular bandwidth of frequency of electromagnetism. So when they are beyond space-time, but they're seeing colors that don't even exist here, what are they seeing?
Well, we think that people who are congenitally blind can have lucid dreams. So they can see color even though they've never physically felt it in the physical world, right?
Which is how we know it's not electromagnetic.
Yeah. And so I'm a master practitioner in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. And one of the attributes of one of the teachings of the NLP technique is a thing called modalities. So you have visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and conceptual. Essentially, those are the major categories. And so you can, each of those major categories have a bunch of submodalities. And so there's a whole complex, there's almost like 100 of submodalities. You know, there's 30 visual submodalities: brightness, darkness, black and white, color, portrait, horizontal, portrait versus landscape, you know, dark, light, you know, grayscale. I mean, there's all these
settings on a camera.
Yeah, and it's so if you were to take a picture and break it down, and you could sort of like categorize the picture into these attributes, then those would be the submodalities. Okay, so your mind works because the submodalities of NLP are part of your mind.
Yep, I'm following.
And because of that, our physical system was created to mimic what's already in our minds. So our eyes and smell and taste and kinesthetic touch and hearing, all of that is because it's more primitive in our mind's eye than it is in the physical.
Yes, and there's many wisdom sayings that we have an eye because there is
exactly. That's
sight.
Exactly the point I'm making.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Because there is smell.
And morphogenic resonance says that we probably knew about these structures so that DNA mirrored that structure and created the form. You know, that there's a resonance. Morphogenic resonance says that the DNA is an antenna also. And by the way, the brain is an antenna. And one of the big things that the brain does, it maps a hyperdimensional space into three-dimensional space. And anytime you reduce the dimensionality of something, you're producing a subset of it or a projection. So we can never see in the physical brain the whole, because we can only ever see a subset of it. So it's only when we're out of body and out of my brain that we can see the whole, because now we're in the concurrent quantum mind. So these are all aspects of that same related topic that we were just talking about. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. I love that. Although maybe just another clarification to the dream state, because I've had people ask me, well, Valerie, you know, after a deep conversation, they will say, do you believe that, right, I'm having an experience in a dream, and it could be a spiritual reality where I'm interacting with beings, like just exactly as a report in an NDE. I don't have to die, but I have all kinds of experiences. I have experiences of other realities. I have experiences of past lives. There's all kinds of things. And so then it begs the question, well, is that dream state just as real as this waking state? And I would love to hear how you would answer that.
Yeah, it's because I was getting to that point with the submodalities. The mind structures information with submodalities independent of the brain. And so that's why we can experience the dream state with all this texture, because the submodalities exist in the mind. And meaning and love also exist only in the mind. So
I love this because just as we said, we have an eye because there is color. We have a brain because there is mind. And why might a human brain differ from some small little organism that doesn't really have a brain, but they're showing some level of thought, if you will?
Some complexity of consciousness.
Yes, there's some complexity of consciousness. And so, like you said, whether it's an amoeba or whether it's a human, all of that mind and consciousness already exists.
Right.
The body, whether amoeba or human, is to simply talk about, earlier we talked about making a decision, making a choice. There's been a choice as to what limited experience might we have.
Yeah, we choose to be more limited than it needs to be, is one way to think about it.
Well, so and certainly a plant is going to have a more limited experience than us, but you know, I love the work that shows that plants have emotions too. So
yeah, exactly. So the plant, I read this book on near-death experiences guy, and he went to this, he had this friend of his, spiritual guide, show up and brought him to this land, and it was like another planet. And he was standing on the grass, and the grass was alive and green and talking with him. And it was individual consciousness as well as mass consciousness of the grass. And then he was describing this whole thing. It was like rich detail. It's like, yes, rich detail about his experience. And then he went and talked to a flower. And then he went and talked to the tree. And then he went and talked to the water. You know, he was just enamored with just connecting with these things that were really conscious. This was all in the virtual world, right? And then he comes back to our world and our grass doesn't talk to us anymore. So it's like we long to be connected at that level. And so this connection is kind of a entanglement. It's kind of a superposition. It's a kind of coupling. But that each thing is conscious and meaning and has intelligence, it's consciousness. So
that is incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
I
don't like the word consciousness. And I don't even like the word consciousness because it's too precise to me.
Yeah, I could tell, which is why I wasn't really using it with you. So we can end on that note, or do you have any last things? I was definitely going to have you talk about the wish device and some things. Do you have any other thoughts that you might want people to know? That was just such a beautiful note you just ended on.
Yeah, I'm thinking that our mind exists, and with all of these subjective experiences, you know, and there is a mechanism for all of that in the meaning and some modality. I mean, you could label it however you want, but somehow our intention and attention and can connect with these things just like we do with a near-death experience, with all the sides, all the complexity that we need, because all of that informational complexity of the consciousness of these things all exist together and are not isolated from each other. We're not in space-time, so we're no longer segregated from each other. We're a whole. We're acting as a whole. We're not segregated by space or time. And so now we can interact in a way that just is what transpersonal experiences are all about. And I love hearing about them for that reason. And I've had a few myself, so I've just not had an NDE. So
yes, I haven't had an NDE. They've just been
transformative experiences,
but I didn't have to die. So yeah, exactly. And I've been having those since as long as I can remember. Yeah, so that's for another time, right?
Yeah.
So I love how you pointed out that if we are on the other side, let's say we are in this non-local reality, this
spiritual being having a physical experience.
Yes. And like you said, it's beautiful because we're experiencing all that is all at the same time. No wonder then it's beyond words. And no wonder it feels like incredible love, because we can only imagine what a quark feels like when it's bound by gluons. But imagine when we're there, feeling this love glue that binds us with all that is when we are there. And then our outer appearance feels like light, and it's this brightness. I mean, like you said, no wonder it's beyond words.
Yeah. And none of that can be neurology or biology, because if it was neurology or biology or hormones, it would all saturate. It wouldn't have an infinite love. So you have to have something without bound. And that can only happen in the quantum mind area with meaning, because it doesn't saturate. It can be infinite intelligence, infinite love. And I talk about that in my book too. So
I love that.
Yeah, so.
Perhaps one parting word, if you have any, for if there are any researchers watching this, and we know that there are various models, most of them are neural correlates of consciousness kinds of models. Unfortunately, we're finally getting the leading edge people going quantum. You bring in the information piece to it. But when you think of the field as a whole, I'll use that term loosely.
Yeah.
And
trying to be holistic.
and you have a wish list of where you want this research to head next. What is the next step for our understanding?
Well, I can't say names yet, but we're already doing research with some, leading institutes, and we would want more. So if you have any appreciation for what I'm saying, and you are a research institute that's wanting to research on it, and you do research, I mean, we know our wish technology is very concrete technology, and yet it's wishful. So, we can talk about that, and by all means, reach out to me. I'm easy to find. Just look at quantumdoug.com and Doug at quantumdoug.com. So I'm easy to find. And of course, it's been a lovely talking with you today, Valerie. I mean, over the last month when we've been talking so much, I've just enjoyed it so much, because you and I are both more on the same wavelength, and we're already trained. So we don't have to co-train each other, so that's always fun when we're finding somebody who's kind of already at your level, so we can kind of go to the next level from here. So that's always fun. So we're looking for other people like that too. So.
Absolutely. This has been amazing. So thanks, Doug, so much. And I'll say good day for now.
Yeah. Adios.